24
Lyra
years
Varnell
later,
vanished from
her
public
name
records in
reappeared,
2001,
written in the dust of her father's murder scene, just minutes before every clock in his antique shop stopped at exactly 11:47 p.m. Osric Varnell, a man known for controlling time down to the second, had finally run out of it. And the only clue left behind was the name of the daughter no one knew existed. What began as a routine homicide would unravel into a chilling blueprint of revenge, obsession, and a brilliant mind determined to turn back the hands of time, permanently. In the quiet town of Havensfield, where nothing ever seemed to happen, life moved at the pace of the ticking clocks that lined the windows of Osric Varnell's watch repair shop. Located at the corner of Ashwood Lane and Fenner Street, the storefront was a fixture of the community, though its owner kept mostly to himself. Osric was an enigma, seen but not known, respected but not understood. He had lived above his shop for over 3 decades, emerging only for groceries, hardware supplies, or the occasional whispered conversation with longtime customers. So when the town woke to news that Osric had been found dead inside his own shop, it sent a tremor through the stillness of Havensfield. It began with a call. At precisely 2:13 a.m. on a storm-soaked Thursday morning, a neighbor, Elida Grange, reported hearing a crash that sounded like glass breaking. She peered through her curtains and saw the door to Osric's shop swinging open in the wind. She thought she saw a shadow move inside, but by the time the police arrived, the place was silent. Officers found Osric slumped over his workbench at the back of the room, a broken pocket watch in his hand, its glass face shattered. Blood had pooled beneath his head. The scene looked staged, but there were no immediate clues to suggest who might have done it or why. The shop itself was eerily quiet. The only sound came from the occasional groan of wood shifting in the old building's bones. What struck investigators immediately was the condition of the clocks. Every single one, whether wall-mounted, resting on a shelf, or hanging from the ceiling, had stopped. The time was the same on each one, 11:47 p.m. No one could explain it. It was as if someone had walked through and stopped them all at once, yet there was no damage to the internal mechanisms. Some were still ticking softly behind their frozen hands, the sounds muffled and reluctant, like a whisper in a sealed room. Detective Maris Calhoun was called in shortly after dawn. Known for her keen observational skills and unflinching focus, she arrived in a gray raincoat, her eyes scanning the scene like she was reading a story only she could decipher. Maris moved slowly through the shop, taking note of the way the dust had settled, the trail of faint scuff marks near the rear exit, the fact that Osric's ledger was open to a blank page, and the unmistakable smell of oil, brass, and blood hanging in the air. There were no signs of forced entry, no shattered locks, no broken windows. Osric had either let someone in willingly, or the killer had a key. Nothing appeared stolen. Rare watches, antique timepieces worth thousands of dollars, were still in their displays. The cash register was untouched. Even Osric's safe, partially open, revealed stacks of documents and several velvet boxes filled with vintage Swiss movements, all undisturbed. The body was taken to the coroner's office just before sunrise. Preliminary observations suggested trauma to the back of the skull, likely from a blunt object. But Maris noticed something that others overlooked: thin bruising around the wrists, faint but present. Osric had been restrained, and if he had been restrained, why wasn't there more of a struggle? Maris turned her attention to the walls. Photos of clocks, sketches of gears, schematics. Osric had catalogued time itself. One photo caught her eye. A shot of the shop's interior from years ago, with a caption scrawled in the corner: "Never let it run out." She tucked it into her notebook without a word. Back in the front of the shop, an officer called her over. In the dust on one of the display cases, a name had been written with a fingertip. Not scratched in, not etched. Just written. 5 letters. Clear as day. Lyra. And just like that, the ticking mystery began. The name written in the dust haunted Maris Calhoun long after she left the scene. Lyra. It was delicate, almost graceful in the way it curved across the display case, too deliberate to be random. Someone had wanted it found. It didn't match any of the names listed in Osric Varnell's known contacts or emergency records. There were no recent calls or emails mentioning the name. The shop had no digital presence, no online orders or customer lists. Osric had run everything the old-fashioned way, using pen and paper. That made it harder, but not impossible. Maris spent the better part of the day digging through public records. She requested archived business licenses, partnership documents, and real estate transactions connected to Osric Varnell. Eventually, buried in an old property deed from 1997, she found it. A co-owner of the building where the clock shop stood, Lyra Varnell, a name that hadn't appeared on anything since 2001. It was a breakthrough. But it came with more questions. If Lyra was a co-owner, why had she vanished from every record after that year? Why had Osric continued to run the shop alone, never once mentioning her existence in interviews or paperwork? Maris ran her name through national databases. No tax records, no employment history, no credit activity. Lyra Varnell had simply disappeared 24 years ago, leaving behind nothing but a name in dust and a gap in time. Further searches led her to a single strange file in the county court archives. It was a restraining order, filed by Osric Varnell against Lyra in late 2000. The document had no attached testimony and no detailed reason, just a general claim of emotional instability and erratic behavior. It was never followed up. There were no police reports, no welfare checks. A month after the filing, Lyra's name vanished from all property and legal records. Maris knew what that usually meant. Either someone went into hiding, or someone made sure they were forgotten. The detective shifted her focus to the local foster care system, checking for any related documents that might suggest Lyra had been in the system. After hours of sifting, through digital archives, she located a file connected to a Lyra V. The file was thin, suggesting an older case, but it revealed that Lyra had briefly entered state custody in the early 1990s. A short notation mentioned suspected abuse by a legal guardian, Osric Varnell, but the case had been closed due to insufficient evidence, and Lyra had been returned to his care within 2 months. There were no follow-up records. It was becoming clear that whatever had happened inside that clock shop went back decades. The case wasn't just a murder. It was a delayed consequence of something deeply buried, an unfinished story with missing chapters. Maris couldn't help but think about the stopped clocks. 11:47 p.m. Something had happened at that time. Something that froze more than just gears and hands. She returned to the shop that evening, hoping to find something the initial sweep had missed. The crime scene was still sealed off. Dust motes floated in the beam of her flashlight as she moved silently through the darkened space. In the far back, behind an old cabinet, she found something. An old ledger bound in cracked leather. Most of it was filled with standard repair. Records, dates, names, charges. But near the back were several pages torn out. The stubs showed they had once been entries dated between 1998 and 2001, the years Lyra had last appeared on any records. The few pages that remained were odd. Instead of repair logs, they were filled with cryptic phrases. One tick-off, not a child of time, and return her before the last second. The handwriting was Osric's. The meaning was unclear, but it felt less like journal entries and more like warnings. Or perhaps confessions. Maris now had a name, a vanished woman with ties to the victim, and a restraining order that hinted at something far more personal than business gone wrong. The deeper she went, the more it felt like Osric hadn't just been killed. He had been waiting for it. The safe in Osric Varnell's shop had been left partially open, as if its contents no longer needed protection. Inside were several neatly stacked documents, a few small boxes of antique clock parts, and a sealed envelope marked with deliberate, red ink. Do not trust her. It wasn't addressed to anyone in particular, but the words suggested Osric had written it for someone to find, perhaps even anticipating his own death. Detective Maris Calhoun opened the envelope with care. Inside were photographs, old, faded, and clearly taken with a film camera. Most showed the shop in its earlier years. One, however, stood out. It featured a much younger Osric standing beside a girl, no more than 6 or 7, in front of a tall grandfather clock. The girl's hair was tied in messy pigtails, and her expression was somber, almost unreadable. Written on the back of the photo in Osric's tight cursive were the words, "Lyra, my burden." My blood! The photo cast everything in a new light. Lyra wasn't just a former co-owner or a business partner. She was his daughter. That changed the context of everything Maris had found so far. The abuse allegation, the restraining order, the disappearance. It all pointed to a fractured relationship that had been kept hidden from the world. But why? What had Osric done that made him hide his own daughter's existence? Maris dug deeper into Lyra's past. If she had vanished, she must have resurfaced somewhere. She contacted a cybersecurity analyst to run facial recognition scans using the photo from the envelope. Days passed with nothing. Then came a result, partial but promising. A surveillance still from a pawn shop in New Jersey, dated just 3 months ago, showed a woman who bore a striking resemblance to the child in the photo. She had sold a custom-built timepiece, one that matched Osric's design signature. That lead unraveled another layer. The woman had used the name Elric Goss on the pawn slip, a forged ID, but enough to create a trail. Through a combination of payment records and surveillance data, Maris traced the alias to a storage unit rented under the same name on the outskirts of Havensfield. It was small, windowless, and hidden behind rows of identical doors in a rundown facility. Inside, Maris found a workspace built for precision. Tables were cluttered with mechanical parts, circuit boards, blueprints, and dozens of disassembled clocks. On one wall, a large corkboard was pinned with photographs of Osric, clippings from old newspapers, and handwritten notes that read like fragments of a plan. In the center of it all was a chilling centerpiece, a schematic of Osric's clock shop, marked with red ink showing potential points of entry, escape routes, and timing estimates. Each route ended with the number 1147, a row of digital timers lined the far wall. Most were powered off. One, however, continued to tick. Its countdown had less than 12 hours remaining. Behind a stack of wiring and boxes, Maris uncovered a small journal bound in black leather. The entries inside were sparse but intense, filled with references to restoration, revenge, and the second hand turning backward. In one entry, the writer described time as a prison, something unnatural that could be unmade if measured correctly. The tone was unhinged but methodical, like someone trying to rewrite history through gears and seconds. Forensics later confirmed that the poison found in Osric's bloodstream matched residue found in the storage unit. It was a complex, synthetic compound with no known commercial use, likely manufactured by hand. The implication was clear. Lyra hadn't just killed her father. She had spent years preparing for it. Maris returned to her office with a mind racing. The storage unit had been vacated just hours before Osric's death. The woman in the surveillance footage had gone dark again, but she had left one message behind, scribbled on the final page of the journal. Time doesn't forget, and neither did I. The autopsy results confirmed what Maris Calhoun already suspected. Osric Varnell's death was far more calculated than it initially appeared. While the blunt force trauma to the back of the head had been the official cause of death, the medical examiner discovered a secondary factor. A rare poison had been introduced into his system. It caused progressive paralysis, shutting down his motor functions and heart in precise sequence. Based on the timeline, the poison had been administered hours before he died, likely ensuring he would be alive, but immobile, when the final act was carried out. The pocket watch found in his hand became a focal point. On the surface, it appeared broken, its face shattered, hands frozen at 11:47 p.m. But upon closer inspection, technicians uncovered a hollowed compartment inside the timepiece containing trace elements of the poison. Someone had rigged the watch to deliver a fatal dose through a needle concealed in the winding mechanism. It was clever, almost poetic. Osric had died holding the very object that sealed his fate. Time had quite literally killed him. Further forensic analysis connected the poison to compounds found in Lyra's storage unit. She hadn't just created a method of killing, she had engineered a message. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a meticulous act of control, one that mirrored the precision Osric had once used in his work. But Lyra's version of precision was far darker. Hers was not about preservation, it was about erasure. Maris reviewed every item taken from the unit again. One object stood out: a digital countdown timer still active when discovered. The team traced its signal to a small receiver embedded in an unmarked parcel placed inside an abandoned antique shop less than 2 blocks from Osric's. It had been mailed days earlier, using a false name and return address. Once the building was secured and the device recovered, it was clear that Lyra hadn't intended for just one man to die. The device resembled a bomb, but it wasn't one in the traditional sense. Instead, it was a timed pressure release mechanism linked to an array of chemicals capable of creating a contained but dangerous gas reaction. The setup was surgical in its targeting. Had it gone off, it wouldn't have leveled buildings or set fires. Instead, it would have seeped through floorboards and vents into neighboring shops, potentially causing dozens of casualties without immediate detection. It was designed to activate at 11:47 p.m. The bomb squad defused it with seconds to spare. Inside the device was a final touch. Another clock, this one wound perfectly, ticking gently. Taped to it was a handwritten note. Second chances don't exist, only second hands. It was clear the target wasn't random. Lyra had planned for her father's death to be part of something much larger. A statement. A final correction to a history no one else seemed to remember. Maris brought the findings to local officials and the FBI. A task force was formed. National alerts were issued, and facial recognition systems were updated with enhanced imagery. Yet Lyra remained invisible, as if she had stepped outside the world's timeline. Back at the station, Maris reviewed old case files again. She couldn't shake the feeling that the 11:47 p.m. timestamp was symbolic. Then she found it. An old welfare report from 2001, filed on November 4th. The listed time of last contact with Lyra before she vanished. 11:47 p.m. That was the moment her presence was erased. That was the second she decided time had to stop. Lyra hadn't just built clocks. She had built a legacy of silence, pain, and precision, and now she was somewhere out there, carrying time with her like a weapon. Winter settled over Havensfield like a heavy quilt, covering the streets in silence and slowing the rhythm of the town. Weeks had passed since the night Osric Varnell died, yet his presence lingered. His clock shop, once filled with the hum of gears and the soft ticking of pendulums, now stood sealed behind yellow tape. Passers-by paused to glance in its direction, whispering theories and remembering the quiet man who had, without anyone realizing it, lived with ghosts. Detective Maris Calhoun sat alone in her office, the case files sprawled across her desk like a map with no clear path. Lyra had vanished again, leaving behind no digital footprints, no sightings, and no new activity linked to her aliases. The woman was methodical, disappearing the same way she had reappeared, by bending time to her will. No one knew what she looked like now. She could be anywhere, anyone. The only thing Maris was certain of, Lyra wasn't finished. Then came the envelope. It arrived with no return address, hand-delivered in the middle of the night to the precinct's secure mail drop. Inside was a single item, a miniature clock, handcrafted with one peculiar feature. Its hands spun backward. Attached was a small card with a single sentence written in ink, so dark it bled slightly into the paper. "Every tick you hear is one you ignored." The handwriting matched the journal entries found in the storage unit. Maris had the clock examined. Its inner mechanism was flawless, but the reversal of movement wasn't a mistake. It was intentional, a symbolic gesture, perhaps even a threat. The hands spun silently, looping endlessly, counting down to something unknown. The message was clear. Lyra was still watching, still calculating, still waiting for the next moment. Despite pressure to close the case, Maris refused. She returned again to Osric's shop, this time with a warrant to examine the upstairs apartment. It was sparse and cold, filled with dust-covered furniture, and a few personal items untouched by time. In the back room, she found a box buried under a floorboard. Inside were journals, dozens of them, written by Osric over a span of 20 years. They detailed the growth of the business, his obsession with precision, and slowly, the unraveling of his relationship with Lyra. He described her as gifted but unnatural, a child who could disassemble a pocket watch before she could read. He wrote of her silence, her cold stare, the way she memorized timetables not just to learn them, but to beat them. By age 10, she was designing clock faces with mathematical sequences he didn't understand. But with her brilliance came something else. Notes hinted at darkness, missing neighborhood pets, fires started without explanation, customers who felt uneasy around her. One journal contained the most revealing entry of all. "She is my creation. Not by blood, but by obsession. I took her in to master time through her. But now I see, she was never meant to be saved, only released." The final line was the most chilling. "She said the world must stop to start over." I think she meant it. Maris understood then that Lyra wasn't simply seeking revenge. She was attempting to reset something, her life, the town's memory, maybe even reality as she saw it. Her actions weren't emotional, they were surgical. In her mind, the clocks weren't reminders of the past, they were cages. And now, she had broken free. In the months that followed, other towns reported similar packages, backward clocks arriving in police stations, libraries, hospitals. No two were the same, but all carried variations of the same message. Time is broken. Fix it, or lose it. The case officially remained open, though the trail grew colder with every passing day. Still, Maris kept the backward clock on her desk. It never stopped turning. Every time she glanced at it, she was reminded of one haunting truth. Some people don't run from the past, they rewind it.